family adopted a strange bear cub, unaware it's not a bear. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The morning mist hung low over the forest as Tobias Reed made his way through the dense trees. His boots crunched on fallen leaves, his breath visible in the cool mountain air. He had moved his family to this remote cabin just 3 weeks ago, seeking peace after years in the noisy city. His wife Mara and their 2 children, 9-year-old Oliver and 7-year-old Ellie, were still adjusting to their new life on the edge of Blackwood Forest. Tobias paused, wiping sweat from his forehead. The stillness of the forest was broken by a sound, faint at first, then growing clearer. A soft whimpering, like a child crying. He turned his head, trying to locate its source. "Hello," he called out, his voice echoing through the trees. The whimpering grew louder. Tobias followed the sound, pushing through a thicket of bushes until he reached a small clearing. There, beside a fallen log, lay a tiny bundle of fur. At first glance it looked like a bear cub, dark brown fur, rounded ears, small paws, but something seemed different. The cub's eyes were unusually bright. Its fur had an odd pattern that Tobias had never seen before on a bear. Still, what else could it be? The cub whimpered again, trying to stand but falling back down. Tobias noticed a streak of blood on its hind leg. Injured and seemingly abandoned. "Poor little guy," Tobias whispered, kneeling down. "Where's your mama?" He scanned the surrounding trees, suddenly aware of the danger. If the mother bear was nearby, he could be in serious trouble. But after several minutes of silence, he became convinced that the cub was alone, abandoned, or orphaned. Removing his jacket, Tobias carefully wrapped the trembling creature. It made no attempt to escape, instead nuzzling against the warmth of his chest. A wave of protectiveness washed over Tobias. He couldn't leave it here to die. "Mara's going to kill me," he muttered, cradling the cub as he began the trek back home. The walk seemed longer with his precious cargo. The cub had stopped whimpering, now making soft snuffling sounds against his shirt. Occasionally, it would look up at him with those strangely intelligent eyes, and Tobias felt an odd connection forming. By the time the cabin came into view, he had already named it in his mind. Scout. "Daddy's home." Ellie's voice rang out as she spotted him from the porch. Then her eyes widened. "What's that?" Before Tobias could answer, Oliver had raced down to join his sister, both children staring wide-eyed at the bundle in their father's arms. "Is that a bear?" Oliver asked, his voice a mix of fear and excitement. "I think so," Tobias replied. "Found him all alone in the forest. He's hurt." Mara appeared at the doorway, her expression changing from welcome to shock. "Tobias Reed, tell me, that is not what I think it is." Tobias approached slowly, the children trailing behind him. "He was abandoned, Mara, injured. I couldn't just leave him there." Mara's gaze softened as she looked at the small creature. The cub lifted its head, those unusual eyes meeting hers, and Tobias saw his wife's resistance melting away, same as his had in the forest. "Just until he's better," Mara said firmly. "Then we find somewhere for him to go." The children erupted in cheers, jumping up and down. "We have a bear! We have a bear!" "Temporary," Mara emphasized, though Tobias noticed she was already examining the cub's injured leg with gentle hands. "And we need to be careful. This is a wild animal." But as they brought Scout inside, laying him on a soft blanket by the fireplace, Tobias couldn't shake the feeling that there was something unusual about this cub. Its ears were slightly more pointed than a bear's should be. Its snout wasn't quite right. And those eyes, they held an intelligence that seemed almost human. That night, as the family sat around Scout, watching him lap milk from a shallow dish, Ellie asked the question that had been nagging at Tobias all day. Are we sure he's a bear, Daddy? He doesn't look exactly like the bears in my books. Tobias exchanged a glance with Mara. What else would he be, sweetheart? But in the flickering firelight, as Scout curled up and fell asleep, his shadow on the wall seemed to transform for just a moment, elongating, shifting into something wilder, something with a longer snout and more pointed ears. Then the flames danced, and it was just the shadow of a bear cub once more. Outside, far in the depths of Blackwood Forest, a lone howl rose up to meet the rising moon. In his sleep, Scout's ear twitched, and he let out a soft sound that wasn't quite a growl and wasn't quite a whimper. It was almost a howl. Days passed, and Scout became more than just a temporary guest in the Reed household. The cub's wounded leg was healing well under Mara's attentive care. Despite her initial reluctance, she had become Scout's primary caretaker, researching bear diets and behavior online during the quiet hours when the children were at school. It says here bear cubs drink their mother's milk for about 8 months, Mara told Tobias one evening, her laptop balanced on her knees. But they start eating solid foods much earlier. Tobias watched as Scout investigated a bowl of berries and honey they'd set out. The cub sniffed at it cautiously, then began to eat with surprising delicacy. He doesn't eat like the bears I've seen in documentaries, Tobias observed. They're usually messier. Mara nodded, a slight furrow appearing between her brows. I've noticed that too. And have you seen how he watches us? Really watches us, like he's trying to understand what we're saying. As if on cue, Scout looked up from his meal, those unsettling intelligent eyes moving between them. For a moment, it almost seemed like he was following their conversation. Oliver and Ellie had fallen head over heels in love with their unusual pet. They spent hours playing with Scout, who had grown stronger each day. The cub was remarkably gentle with the children, never once scratching or biting despite their sometimes overzealous affection. "Can we take Scout outside, Mom?" Oliver asked one sunny afternoon, his science homework forgotten on the kitchen table. "He keeps looking out the window. I think he wants to explore." Mara hesitated. They'd kept Scout confined to the house while his leg healed, but she had noticed his increasing restlessness. "I suppose a little time in the yard wouldn't hurt. But he stays on the leash we made, understand? And you don't let him out of your sight." The children cheered, rushing to find the makeshift leash Tobias had created from an old belt. Scout seemed to understand what was happening, bouncing excitedly on his paws in a way that made everyone laugh. Once outside, Scout moved with a grace that surprised them all. His injury barely noticeable now, he sniffed around the perimeter of their yard, occasionally stopping to dig at the earth or investigate a bush. But what struck Tobias, who was watching from the porch, was how the cub kept raising his head to sniff the air, especially when looking toward the deeper parts of the forest. "He's getting bigger," Tobias commented to Mara that evening after the children had gone to bed. Scout was curled up on his special blanket near the fireplace, seemingly asleep. "And I swear his face looks different." Mara nodded slowly. "His snout seems longer, and his ears, they're definitely more pointed than when you first brought him home." "Maybe he's not a black bear, could be a different species," Tobias suggested, though uncertainty tinged his voice. "Maybe." Mara didn't sound convinced. "Tobias, we need to start thinking about what happens next. We can't keep a wild bear as a pet, it's not legal, and eventually he'll be too big and dangerous." Tobias sighed, running a hand through his hair. I know. I've been looking into wildlife rehabilitation centers. There's one about 100 miles from here that might take him. Neither of them noticed that Scout's eyes had opened slightly, watching them with an unnerving focus. The next morning brought their first visitor since moving to the cabin. A truck with Blackwood Forest Ranger Service emblazoned on its side pulled up their long driveway. Tobias was chopping wood outside and paused mid-swing as a tall woman in a forest ranger uniform approached. "Morning," she called. "Name's Ranger Cassidy Harper. Just making my rounds, checking in on folks living near the forest border." Tobias set down his axe, wiping his palms on his jeans before extending a hand. "Tobias Reed. We moved in a few weeks ago." Ranger Harper shook his hand firmly. "Nice to meet you. Everything been all right? No trouble with wildlife or anything?" Something in her tone made Tobias hesitate. "No, nothing unusual," he replied, then immediately felt guilty for the lie. "Why do you ask?" The ranger's eyes scanned the property before returning to Tobias. "We've had some strange reports lately. A pack of what some locals are calling super wolves has been spotted in the eastern part of the forest." "Super wolves?" Tobias couldn't help but chuckle. "That's what they're saying." Ranger Harper didn't share his amusement. "Larger than normal wolves, unusual coloring, extremely intelligent. Probably just regular wolves and overactive imaginations, but I like to keep tabs on these things." From inside the house came the sound of something crashing, followed by Ellie's surprised yelp. Tobias tensed, his gaze shooting to the cabin door. "Everything okay in there?" the ranger asked. "Fine," Tobias said quickly. "Just the kids, playing." Ranger Harper nodded, though her expression remained skeptical. "Well, I should continue my rounds. Here's my card. Call if you see anything unusual in these woods. Anything at all." As the ranger's truck disappeared down the driveway, Tobias hurried inside to find Mara picking up pieces of a broken vase. Scout was nowhere to be seen. "What happened?" he asked, helping her gather the ceramic shards. "Scout heard the truck and panicked," Mara explained in a hushed voice. "He knocked over the vase trying to hide under the couch. Tobias, he knew that was a ranger. He understood." Before Tobias could respond, Oliver called from the back of the house. "Mom, Dad, come quick. Something's wrong with Scout." They rushed to Oliver's bedroom, where they found both children huddled around Scout. The cub was pressed against the wall, his body trembling violently. But what made them all freeze was the change in his appearance. His fur, previously a uniform dark brown, now showed distinct patterns. Lighter patches forming what almost looked like a mask around his eyes, and streaks of silver along his sides. "What's happening to him?" Ellie whimpered, her small hand hovering uncertainly over Scout's shaking form. Tobias and Mara exchanged alarmed glances. "Kids, step back," Tobias said gently but firmly. "I think Scout might be sick." As the children reluctantly moved away, Mara knelt beside the trembling cub. "Tobias," she whispered, "look at his paws." Scout's paws were changing before their eyes, his claws extending and then retracting, the pads of his feet seeming to elongate and then shrink back to normal. It lasted only seconds, but there was no denying what they'd seen. That's not possible," Tobias breathed. That night, after the children were finally asleep, Tobias and Mara sat at the kitchen table, speaking in hushed tones. "He's not a bear," Mara stated flatly. "I don't know what he is, but no bear cub changes its fur pattern or transforms its paws like that." Tobias nodded, his face grim. The ranger mentioned something about super wolves being spotted in the forest. What if what if Scout is one of them? Mara finished his thought. But he doesn't look like a wolf either. He's something in between. A soft whine drew their attention. Scout stood in the doorway, his appearance once again normal, or what they had come to think of as normal. He padded over to them, resting his head on Tobias's knee with a gentle pressure. Despite the fear and confusion of the day, Tobias found himself reaching down to stroke the cub's head. "What are you?" he whispered. Outside, the night wind carried distant howls, multiple voices calling in harmony across the dark expanse of Blackwood Forest. Scout's ears perked up, his body going still. Without warning, he let out a sound that was definitely not a bear's cry. A high, clear howl that raised goosebumps on Tobias's arms. Then, as if embarrassed by his outburst, Scout ducked his head and slunk away to his blanket by the fireplace. Mara gripped Tobias's hand. "Did you hear that?" "That was a wolf. Our bear just howled like a wolf." "I think," Tobias said slowly, "we need to learn more about what's really in those woods." The next morning, Tobias called the children's school and told them both kids would be absent. A family emergency. It wasn't entirely a lie. Whatever Scout was, the situation had become too strange to ignore, and he wanted everyone close to home until they figured out what to do. While the children played with Scout in the living room, the cub back to his normal behavior as if nothing unusual had happened, Tobias and Mara conducted frantic research on Tobias's laptop. "Listen to this," Mara said, turning the screen toward him. "There are legends in this region about creatures called shifters, animals that could take different forms or had characteristics of multiple species." Tobias skimmed the article, his skepticism warring with the evidence of his own eyes. "That's just folklore, Mara." "Is it?" She glanced meaningfully toward the living room, where Scout was gently tugging on a rope toy while Oliver and Ellie laughed. "What about what we saw yesterday?" Before Tobias could respond, a knock at the door made them both jump. Through the window, they could see Ranger Harper's truck parked in their driveway again. "Keep Scout and the kids in the back of the house," Tobias whispered, standing up. "I'll handle this." Mara nodded, hurrying to gather the children and their unusual pet, while Tobias went to answer the door. Ranger Harper's expression was significantly less friendly than the day before. "Mr. Reed," she said without preamble, "I need to ask you a few direct questions." "Of course," Tobias replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "Would you like to come in?" "That won't be necessary," she said, remaining on the porch. "Last night, around 11 p.m., we received multiple reports of wolf howls in this area. Unusual, because wolves typically howl at dusk or dawn, not the middle of the night. Even more unusual was that several of our tracking stations picked up what we believe was a juvenile call. A young wolf responding to the pack." Tobias fought to keep his expression neutral. "That's interesting, but I'm not sure what it has to do with us." Ranger Harper's eyes narrowed slightly. The triangulation of that juvenile call put it very close to your property, Mr. Reed. Almost as if it came from inside your house. "We didn't hear anything," Tobias lied. "The kids were asleep. My wife and I were watching TV." The ranger studied him for a long moment. "Mr. Reed, I should inform you that harboring protected wildlife without proper authorization is a federal offense. If you've found an injured animal, the right thing to do is contact our office immediately." "I understand," Tobias said. "If we find anything, you'll be the first to know." After the ranger left, Tobias leaned against the closed door, his heart pounding. When he turned around, he found Mara standing in the hallway, her face pale. "She knows something," Mara whispered. "Or suspects something," Tobias corrected. "But she doesn't have proof. Not yet." A sudden commotion from the back of the house made them both run toward the children's rooms. They found Oliver and Ellie in the bathroom, the door to the adjoining bedroom open. Both children looked terrified. "He jumped out the window!" Oliver exclaimed, pointing to the open window above the bed. Scout just suddenly went crazy when he heard the ranger's voice. He was scratching at the wall, and then he just jumped. Tobias rushed to the window. It was a first-floor room, so the drop wasn't far, but still concerning for a small animal. Outside, he could see paw prints in the soft earth leading toward the forest edge. "Stay here," he told Mara and the children. "I'll find him." Grabbing his jacket, Tobias raced outside, following the tracks. They led directly into the trees, becoming harder to see as the ground grew rockier. About 50 yards into the forest, Tobias stopped, realizing he'd lost the trail. "Scout!" he called, turning in a circle. "Scout, come back!" Only the rustle of leaves answered him. Then, from deeper in the woods, came a soft whimper. Not quite a bear's sound, not quite a wolf's. Tobias followed it, pushing through underbrush, scratching his arms on thorns in his haste. He emerged into a small clearing and froze. There in the center stood Scout, but he was different again. His fur had completely changed pattern, now more wolf-like with distinct markings. His snout was longer, ears more pointed, legs leaner. He was midway between bear and wolf, caught in some impossible transformation. But what truly shocked Tobias was that Scout wasn't alone. Sitting calmly at the edge of the clearing was the largest wolf Tobias had ever seen. Easily twice the size of a normal wolf, with striking silver and black fur. Its yellow eyes regarded Tobias without fear or aggression, merely curiosity. As Tobias stood paralyzed by the sight, Scout turned to him and made a soft huffing sound. The large wolf stood and approached Scout, gently nuzzling the smaller creature. There was no mistaking the gesture. It was parental, protective. "You're his mother," Tobias whispered in awe. "You're what the rangers are calling super wolves." The large wolf's ears twitched at his voice, its intelligent gaze assessing him. Then, with deliberate slowness, it lowered its massive head in what almost seemed like gratitude. A twig snapped behind Tobias, and he whirled around to find himself face to face with Ranger Harper, her eyes wide with shock as she took in the scene before them. "My God," she breathed. "It's true. They're real." For a moment, all three stood frozen in the clearing. Tobias, Ranger Harper, and the massive wolf with Scout at its side. The air seemed to vibrate with tension. Then the large wolf's posture changed, hackles rising as it shifted to stand protectively in front of Scout. A low, rumbling growl emerged from its throat. "Don't move," Ranger Harper whispered, her hand slowly moving toward the tranquilizer gun holstered at her hip. "These aren't ordinary wolves." "Wait," Tobias said urgently, stepping between the ranger and the wolves. "Don't hurt them. Scout knows us. He's been living with my family for weeks." Ranger Harper's eyes widened. "Scout? You named it?" Her gaze darted between Tobias and the creatures. "You're the one who's been harboring it? The juvenile shifter?" "Shifter," Tobias repeated, his suspicion confirmed. "So you know what they are." The ranger's expression hardened. "Mr. Reed, you have no idea what you've gotten yourself involved in. Step aside." "No." Tobias planted his feet firmly. "I'm not letting you tranquilize them. Scout trusts us, and I think his mother does too, or she would have attacked by now." As if understanding his words, the large wolf's growl subsided, though it remained alert, yellow eyes fixed on the ranger. "Lower your hand," Tobias instructed Harper. "Slowly. Show her you're not a threat." Reluctantly, the ranger complied, moving her hand away from her weapon. "This is against protocol," she muttered. "Look at them," Tobias urged. "They're intelligent. They understand us." Scout had begun to change again, his form shifting subtly back toward his more bear-like appearance, the one the Reed family had grown accustomed to. The transformation wasn't complete, leaving him in a strange middle state, neither fully bear nor fully wolf. "Fascinating," Ranger Harper whispered despite herself. "I've been tracking reports of these creatures for years, but I've never seen one up close, let alone witnessed a transformation." The large wolf made a soft huffing sound, then nudged Scout gently. Scout looked back at his mother, then to Tobias, his unusual eyes reflecting what seemed like genuine confusion. "He's torn," Tobias realized aloud. "He doesn't know whether to stay with us or go with her." "With his mother," Ranger Harper corrected, "where he belongs." A movement at the edge of the clearing caught their attention. Two more large wolves emerged from the trees, one dark gray with a white chest, the other a reddish-brown. They moved with the same unnatural grace as Scout's mother, their eyes holding the same disturbing intelligence. "The pack," Harper breathed. "3 adults. This is unprecedented documentation." "Are they dangerous?" Tobias asked quietly. "Any wild animal can be dangerous," the ranger replied. "But these, we don't fully understand what they are. The native tribes that originally inhabited this region had legends about spirit animals that could walk between forms. Scientists who've studied tissue samples believe they might be an undocumented hybrid species with unusual genetic plasticity. Meaning they can alter their physical appearance to some degree, a survival adaptation perhaps, or something we don't yet comprehend." Her voice took on a tone of wonder. "We've been calling them shifters internally, though that's not an official classification." Scout whimpered softly, looking between Tobias and the wolf pack. The mother wolf made a sound that was almost like speech, a complex series of yips and growls. In response, Scout took a hesitant step toward the pack, then stopped, looking back at Tobias. "He's bonded with your family," Ranger Harper observed. "That's unexpected. These creatures usually avoid human contact entirely." "What happens now?" Tobias asked, his throat tight with emotion. He had come to love the strange little cub, and he knew the children would be devastated to lose him. Before the ranger could answer, the snap of branches announced another arrival. Tobias turned to see Mara pushing through the undergrowth, Oliver and Ellie close behind her. "Tobias," Mara called. "We couldn't wait." She stopped abruptly, taking in the scene before her. The children froze beside her, their eyes growing wide. "Scout!" Ellie cried, starting forward. "Stay back!" Ranger Harper commanded, throwing out an arm to block the child. But it was too late. Ellie had already darted past, running straight toward Scout without a trace of fear. Oliver followed close behind, ignoring the adults' shouts. The adult wolves tensed, the mother wolf's growl returning as the children approached. Tobias's heart hammered in his chest, terror gripping him as he envisioned the massive predators attacking his children. But then, something remarkable happened. Scout bounded forward to meet the children, his body shifting fully back to the bear cub form they recognized. He wiggled excitedly, making the playful, huffing sounds that had become familiar in their home. "Scout, you're okay," Oliver exclaimed, dropping to his knees to wrap his arms around the cub. Ellie joined him, burying her face in Scout's fur. The mother wolf watched, her growl subsiding. She tilted her head, observing the interaction with what could only be described as confusion. "Incredible," Ranger Harper murmured. "The children show no fear, and the shifter responds to them as if they're pack." Mara had reached Tobias's side, gripping his arm tightly. "What's happening? Are those wolves?" "Not exactly," Tobias replied, his voice low. "That large one with the silver markings, she's Scout's mother. And they're not ordinary wolves. The ranger calls them shifters." The three adult wolves conferred with each other through a series of soft sounds. Then, to everyone's amazement, the mother wolf approached the children. Slowly, deliberately, her posture non-threatening. Ranger Harper tensed again, her hand hovering near her weapon. "Mr. and Mrs. Reed, call your children back, now." But Tobias felt a strange certainty. "Wait," he said. "I don't think she means them harm." The mother wolf stopped a few feet from the children, who had finally noticed her presence. Unlike the adults, they showed curiosity rather than fear. "Is that Scout's mommy?" Ellie asked, her voice filled with wonder. "She's beautiful." The wolf's ears twitched at the child's words. She lowered her massive head, sniffing the air around the children, then around Scout. After a moment, she made a soft chuffing sound. Scout responded with a similar noise, then nuzzled the children once more before reluctantly stepping away from them, moving to his mother's side. "He's leaving with them," Mara whispered, understanding dawning in her voice. "He's going back to his family." Ellie's face crumpled. "No, Scout, don't go." She reached for him, but Oliver held her back, his young face solemn with understanding beyond his years. "He needs to be with his real family, Ellie," he said gently, "with other shifters like him." "Shifters?" Mara looked questioningly at Tobias and the ranger. "I'll explain everything later," Tobias promised. The mother wolf made another sound, and the pack began to retreat, Scout looking back repeatedly at the Reed family. As they reached the edge of the clearing, Scout broke away suddenly, running back to the children. He pressed against each of them in turn, then against Tobias's legs, and finally approached Mara, looking up at her with those intelligent eyes. Mara knelt down, tears streaming down her face. "Goodbye, Scout," she whispered, stroking his head one last time. "We'll miss you." With what sounded almost like a sigh, Scout turned and rejoined the pack. Within moments, they had disappeared into the depths of the forest. Silence fell over the clearing. "What now?" Tobias asked the ranger, who was watching the forest with an unreadable expression. "Now," Ranger Harper said, "we need to talk." Back at the cabin, the mood was somber. Ellie had cried herself to sleep, while Oliver sat quietly by the window, staring out at the forest. Tobias, Mara, and Ranger Harper sat at the kitchen table, cups of untouched coffee before them. "Let me be clear," the ranger was saying, her voice low to avoid being overheard by Oliver. "What you encountered today is classified information. The existence of the shifters is not public knowledge for a reason." "Which is?" Mara pressed. "Protection," Harper replied simply. "If the general public knew about a species that could change form, even minimally between canid and ursine features, there would be a media frenzy. Hunters would flood these woods. Scientists would want specimens for study. The shifters would never know peace." "So what happens to us?" Tobias asked. "Are you going to arrest us for harboring Scout?" The ranger sighed, rubbing her temples. "Officially, I should. You violated multiple wildlife protection laws, but—" She paused, glancing toward Oliver. "The situation is unprecedented. No human has ever reported a shifter accepting them, let alone living with them. Your experience could be invaluable to our understanding of these creatures. So I'm proposing a compromise. Instead of charges, you work with me. Tell me everything about Scout, his behaviors, his diet, his communications. Help me understand these creatures better so I can protect them more effectively." Tobias and Mara exchanged glances. And in return, Mara asked cautiously, in return, you get to stay in your home, and I ensure the research division of the Forest Service doesn't come knocking on your door to take your children for questioning about their interaction with a shifter. The threat was thinly veiled, but the protection being offered was real. Tobias nodded slowly. We'll help however we can. Ranger Harper's expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, I think you did right by that cub. You saved his life, and the fact that his mother didn't attack you suggests she recognized that too. After the ranger left with a promise to return the next day, Tobias and Mara sat in silence, processing the day's events. Do you think we'll ever see Scout again? Mara asked finally. Tobias looked out the window toward the darkening forest. I don't know, but I hope so. That night, as the family tried to adjust to Scout's absence, a sound drifted through their open window. A distant howl, followed by a higher-pitched response. Not quite a bear's call, not quite a wolf's. Something in between. Oliver, who had refused to go to bed, smiled faintly. He's saying good night. 3 weeks passed without any sign of Scout or the shifter pack. Ranger Harper visited regularly, collecting the Reeds' observations about their time with Scout and sharing what little information she could about the research being conducted on the shifters. The leading theory, she explained during one such visit, is that they're an ancient hybrid species, perhaps a crossbreed between ancestral wolves and short-faced bears that somehow maintained genetic plasticity, allowing individuals to express traits from both species. That doesn't explain their intelligence, Mara pointed out. Scout understood us, really understood us. Harper nodded thoughtfully. There are aspects of these creatures we may never fully comprehend. Some of the indigenous peoples of this region believed they were spiritual beings, not entirely of this world. The children had adjusted to Scout's absence better than expected, though they still spoke of him often. Ellie had taken to drawing pictures of her memories with Scout, while Oliver had developed a sudden intense interest in wildlife biology, devouring books about wolves and bears. Life was slowly returning to normal, or as normal as it could be after such an extraordinary experience, until one stormy night in late October, when everything changed again. The rain had been pouring for hours, thunder shaking the windows of the cabin. Tobias was checking that all the doors and windows were secure against the storm when a sound caught his attention. A frantic scratching at the back door, barely audible over the rain. Heart pounding with sudden hope, he rushed to open it. There, on the porch, soaking wet and trembling, stood Scout. Larger than when they'd last seen him, but unmistakable in his bear-like form. "Scout?" Tobias whispered, kneeling down. "What are you doing here, buddy?" The shifter whined urgently, pawing at Tobias's leg, then turning to look back at the forest. The message was clear. "Follow me." "Mara," Tobias called. "Come quick." Within minutes, the entire family was gathered at the door, exclaiming over Scout's unexpected return. But their joy quickly turned to concern as they recognized his distress. "Something's wrong," Mara said, noticing the way Scout kept looking back at the forest, making anxious sounds. "He wants us to go with him." "In this storm?" Tobias glanced outside at the downpour. "It must be important." "I'll call Ranger Harper," Mara decided, reaching for her phone. While they waited for the ranger to arrive, Scout grew increasingly agitated, pacing by the door, occasionally letting out short, sharp barks that sounded nothing like a bear. 20 minutes later, Harper's truck pulled up outside. She rushed to the porch, her rain gear gleaming in the porch light. "Where is he?" she demanded, and then stopped short when she saw Scout. "Remarkable. He came back to you. He wants us to follow him, Tobias explained. "Something's wrong in the forest." The ranger's expression grew serious. "There's been illegal activity in the eastern sector. Poachers, we think. We've found snares and trail cameras that weren't set by our department." She looked at Scout with newfound understanding. The pack might be in danger. "We have to help," Oliver declared, already pulling on his rain boots. "Absolutely not," Mara began, but was interrupted by Scout's most urgent bark yet. The shifter had moved to the boy's side, clearly indicating that he wanted Oliver to come. "Mrs. Reed," Ranger Harper said carefully, "I understand your concern, but these creatures have a bond with your children that might be crucial right now. If the pack is in trouble, you can't seriously be suggesting we take our children out in a thunderstorm to face potential poachers," Mara said incredulously. "I'm going to call for backup," Harper assured her. "But Scout came here for a reason. He trusts you, all of you." A particularly loud crack of thunder made them all jump. Scout whined again, pawing at the door. "Time is critical," the ranger added. "If there are wounded shifters, we need to find them before the poachers do." After a tense discussion, a compromise was reached. Mara would stay at the cabin with Ellie, while Tobias and Oliver would accompany Ranger Harper and Scout into the forest. The ranger distributed extra rain gear and flashlights from her truck. "Stay close," she instructed as they set off into the stormy night, Scout leading the way with purposeful steps. "And if I tell you to run, you run. No questions." The forest was transformed by the storm. Familiar paths now muddy and treacherous, branches whipping in the wind. Scout moved with certainty, occasionally looking back to ensure they were following. Despite the difficult conditions, Tobias noticed that the shifter was taking them along the easiest possible route, avoiding steep slopes and dense underbrush. They had been walking for nearly 20 minutes when Scout suddenly stopped, his body tense. Ahead, barely visible through the rain, was a faint light. Artificial, moving. Flashlights. Ranger Harper gestured for them to crouch down. "Poachers," she whispered, pulling out her binoculars. After a moment of observation, she added grimly, 3 of them. Armed. "What are they hunting?" Tobias asked, though he already feared the answer. "The shifters," Harper confirmed. "They must have spotted them somehow." Scout was trembling, not from the cold, but from what seemed like rage or fear. He made a soft noise, different from anything they'd heard before, almost like speech. From the darkness came a response. The same vocalization, barely audible over the rain. Scout immediately changed direction, leading them away from the poachers and deeper into the forest. After another 10 minutes of difficult hiking, they reached a small cave set into a hillside. Scout darted inside without hesitation. The humans followed more cautiously, Ranger Harper going first with her hand on her weapon. What they found inside made them all freeze in shock. The mother wolf, Scout's mother, lay on her side, breathing heavily. A crude snare was tangled around one of her back legs, the metal wire cutting into her flesh. Blood matted her silver fur. Beside her, the other 2 adult shifters stood guard, their hackles raised as the humans entered. But most surprising of all was the presence of 2 small cubs. True cubs, younger than Scout had been when Tobias found him. They huddled against their injured mother, making pitiful sounds of distress. "She has babies," Oliver whispered, his voice a mix of awe and concern. "That's why Scout came for help. She's hurt, and she has babies to protect." Ranger Harper was already moving forward, her hands held open in a non-threatening gesture. "I need to remove that snare before it does more damage," she said softly. "Tobias, I'll need your help holding her still." The 2 uninjured adult shifters growled warning, but Scout moved to intercede, making those strange, speech-like sounds again. After what seemed like a tense negotiation, the other shifters backed away slightly, though they watched with evident distrust. "Oliver, stay by the entrance," Tobias instructed his son. "If you see flashlights, warn us immediately." The boy nodded solemnly, taking up his post while Tobias joined the ranger beside the injured shifter. Up close, the creature was even more magnificent, and more obviously not a normal wolf. Her fur had subtle patterns that shifted as she breathed, sometimes appearing more bear-like, sometimes more wolf-like. Her eyes, yellow with flecks of amber, watched them with clear intelligence, and what Tobias could only interpret as desperation. "This will hurt," Ranger Harper told the shifter directly, as if speaking to a person. "But we need to remove the wire. Do you understand?" To Tobias's amazement, the creature made a distinct nodding motion with her massive head. "Hold her legs steady," Harper instructed Tobias. "I'll cut the wire." As they worked to free the injured shifter, Scout moved to comfort his siblings, for that's what the cubs clearly were. He nuzzled them gently, making soft sounds that seemed to calm them. Oliver, unable to resist, had abandoned his post to watch in fascination. "Almost got it," Harper muttered, her wire cutters making slow progress through the reinforced snare. "This is illegal equipment, designed specifically for large predators. These poachers knew exactly what they were after." Finally, the snare came free. The shifter's leg was badly lacerated, but Harper quickly applied antiseptic and wrapped it with bandages from her emergency kit. "She needs more medical attention than I can provide here," the ranger said worriedly, "but I can't exactly take her to a vet." As if responding to her words, the injured shifter struggled to her feet, wincing visibly but standing firm. She made a series of sounds to the other adults, who moved to flank her protectively. The cubs scrambled up as well, staying close to their mother. "They're leaving," Tobias realized. "Even injured, she wants to get her family away from the poachers." "It's too dangerous," Harper objected. "She can barely walk, and those men are still out there." Scout made another sound, this one directed at Tobias and Oliver. Then he moved to the cave entrance, clearly indicating they should follow. "I think," Oliver said slowly, "I think they have another safe place. Scout wants to show us." "Dad!" Oliver's urgent whisper cut through the conversation. "Flashlights! Coming this way." Everyone tensed. The poachers were approaching the cave. "Go," Harper said to the shifters, making a shooing motion. "We'll delay them." The adult shifters needed no further encouragement. They herded the cubs toward a narrow passage at the back of the cave, one that Tobias hadn't noticed before. As they disappeared into the darkness, Scout lingered, looking back at the Reed family. For a moment, it seemed he would stay with them. Then the mother shifter made a soft call, and Scout turned to follow his birth family. "Be safe," Tobias whispered after him. As the flashlight beams grew closer to the cave entrance, Ranger Harper quickly formulated a plan. "We're hikers, caught in the storm taking shelter," she said rapidly. "I'm a ranger, showing you a safe route back to your cabin. Understand?" Tobias and Oliver nodded just as 3 men appeared at the cave entrance, their flashlights blinding after the dim interior. Well, said the lead man, his voice hard. "What do we have here?" Ranger Harper stepped forward, her badge prominently displayed. "Blackwood Forest Ranger Service. Identify yourselves." The men exchanged glances. "Just hunters," the leader replied smoothly. "Got caught in the storm." "With illegal snare equipment?" Harper's voice was cold. "I've already called this in. Backup is on the way." Tobias couldn't tell if she was bluffing, but her confidence made the men hesitate. "We haven't done anything wrong," another man protested, though his nervous glance toward the back of the cave suggested otherwise. "We're tracking some unusual predator sign for research." "With guns and snares?" Harper's eyebrow raised. "You'll need to come with me to the ranger station to explain that research in detail." The standoff might have escalated further, but suddenly a chorus of howls erupted from what sounded like just outside the cave, eerily close and unnaturally loud. The sound was unlike anything Tobias had ever heard, haunting and primeval, raising the hair on his arms. The poachers paled. "What the hell was that?" one whispered. More howls answered, seemingly coming from multiple directions at once. It was an auditory illusion, Tobias realized. The shifters were using the acoustics of the forest and the storm to make themselves sound more numerous. "That," Ranger Harper said with grim satisfaction, "is what happens when you mess with the wildlife in my forest. Now, gentlemen, I suggest you surrender your weapons and equipment immediately." Thoroughly unnerved, the poachers complied. As Harper zip-tied their hands with plastic restraints from her kit, she whispered to Tobias, "Get Oliver back to your cabin. I'll handle this." And Tobias... She glanced meaningfully toward where the shifters had disappeared. "Not a word to anyone about what you saw tonight, for their safety." Tobias nodded, taking Oliver's hand and leading him out of the cave. The storm was beginning to ease, the rain reduced to a gentle patter. As they made their way back toward home, Oliver suddenly stopped. "Dad, look." At the edge of the forest, just visible in the moonlight that now broke through the clouds, stood Scout. He was alone, watching them from a distance. When he saw that they had noticed him, he raised his head and made a soft sound. Not quite a howl, not quite a bark. A goodbye. "Will we ever see him again?" Oliver asked, his voice small. Tobias put his arm around his son's shoulders. "I don't know, buddy, but I hope so." As if in answer, Scout turned and disappeared into the trees, a shadow melting into shadows. Spring came to Blackwood Forest, turning the world green again. The Reed family had settled fully into their life at the cabin, the extraordinary events of the previous fall fading into a story they sometimes wondered if they had dreamed. Ranger Harper had kept her word. The poachers were prosecuted for illegal hunting practices, though no mention of the shifters appeared in any official report. Harper visited occasionally, sharing what little news she could: unconfirmed sightings, strange tracks, the distant sound of howls that weren't quite wolf-like. But of Scout and his family there had been no sign. Until the morning Ellie came running into the kitchen, her eyes wide with excitement. "Mom, Dad, come quick. There's something outside." The family rushed to the porch, where Ellie was pointing toward the edge of their yard. There, half hidden by spring flowers, sat a small cairn of stones that hadn't been there the day before. Atop it lay a single, perfect pine cone. "Scout," Oliver whispered, scanning the tree line. As if summoned by his name, a shape emerged from the forest. Larger than they remembered, his form more solidly wolf-like now, but with the same intelligent eyes they would recognize anywhere. Scout approached cautiously, stopping at the edge of the yard. Behind him, partially concealed by trees, the silhouettes of other shifters were just visible. The pack, watching from a safe distance. "He came back," Mara breathed, squeezing Tobias's hand. Scout didn't come closer, maintaining his position at the boundary between the wild forest and the human world, but he raised his head, meeting each of their gazes in turn, a connection that transcended species. Then, with what seemed like deliberate care, he lowered his head and pushed the cairn of stones with his nose, sending the pine cone rolling toward the family. A gift, Tobias realized. he brought us a gift." Oliver stepped forward slowly, picking up the pine cone. "Thank you," he called softly. Scout made that familiar huffing sound, the one that had always seemed like laughter during his time with them. Then he turned, trotting back to the waiting pack. At the forest's edge, he paused for one last look before disappearing into the trees. But they all knew this wasn't a final goodbye. The cairn of stones marked something else. A boundary, yes, but also a meeting place. A promise. "He'll be back," Ellie said with absolute certainty, looking up at her parents with a smile. "He's still part of our family, even if he lives in the forest now." Tobias nodded, watching the place where Scout had vanished. In a world where bears could be wolves and wolves could be something more, where ancient creatures walk the line between forms, perhaps family too could transcend its usual boundaries. The pine cone now sat on their mantelpiece, a reminder that some bonds, once formed, never truly break. They just transform, like the shifters themselves, into something new and wonderful. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon was full, the Reed family would sit on their porch and listen. From deep in the heart of Blackwood Forest would come a sound. Not quite a howl, not quite a roar. Something in between. Scout's voice calling to them across the distance, reminding them that they had once taken in a strange bear cub, only to discover it wasn't a bear at all. It was something much more magical, something that had changed their lives forever. 5 years passed. The Reed family remained in their cabin by Blackwood Forest, though much had changed. Oliver, now 14, had become deeply involved in wildlife conservation, volunteering with Ranger Harper during summer breaks. Ellie, at 12, had developed a talent for art, her drawings of forest creatures showing an uncanny understanding of their anatomy and spirit. The cairn of stones at the edge of their property had become something of a communication point. Sometimes they would find small gifts there, unusual feathers, interestingly shaped stones, once even a perfect deer antler shed naturally in the forest. In return, the family would leave their own tokens, a jar of honey, a child's drawing, or simply a rearrangement of the stones to signal they had received the message. Ranger Harper had been promoted to head of the Blackwood Forest Conservation Program. Using the knowledge gained from the Reed family's experience with Scout, she had established protected zones within the forest where the shifters were known to den. The poaching incident had led to stricter enforcement of the area's boundaries and a careful disinformation campaign that labeled certain parts of the forest as contaminated from old mining operations, a fiction that kept curiosity seekers away from shifter territory. It was a cool autumn evening, much like the one when Tobias had first found Scout, when Oliver came bursting through the cabin door. "Dad, Mom, you need to see this." His voice vibrated with excitement as he grabbed his binoculars from the hook by the door. The family followed him outside to the large deck Tobias had built the previous summer. Oliver pointed toward the forest edge, where the last rays of sunlight illuminated the trees. "Look," he whispered, handing the binoculars to his father. "By the old oak." Tobias focused the lenses. There, half hidden in the shadows, stood a magnificent creature. Unmistakably Scout, now fully grown into a powerful adult shifter. His form had stabilized over the years into something that was neither fully wolf nor bear, but a harmonious blend of both. The strong, compact body of a bear with the leaner features and coat patterns of a wolf. His intelligent eyes, visible even at this distance, were fixed on the cabin. But what made Tobias's breath catch was the smaller creature at Scout's side. A juvenile shifter, perhaps a year old, with distinctive markings that resembled Scout's, but with unique variations. "He has a family of his own," Mara whispered, taking her turn with the binoculars. "Oh, Tobias, look at them." Scout seemed to sense they had spotted him. He raised his head in acknowledgement, then nudged the younger shifter forward slightly. The younger one made a tentative movement toward the yard, but stopped, clearly uncertain. "He's introducing his child to us," Ellie realized, her eyes wide, like passing down family history. As they watched, 3 more shifters emerged from the trees. A female with sleek silver-gray fur who could only be Scout's mate, and 2 more juveniles, slightly smaller than the first. 3 cubs, Oliver counted softly. "He's brought his whole family." Tobias felt a lump form in his throat. In all the years since Scout had returned to the wild, he had maintained a distance, visible occasionally, but never bringing others with him, never fully crossing from the wild world back into the human one. This was something new, something profound. After a moment of consideration, Tobias went back into the house and returned with the pine cone, the original gift Scout had left them years ago, still preserved on their mantelpiece. With careful movements, he walked to the cairn of stones and placed the pine cone atop it, then backed away to rejoin his family. Scout watched this ritual with evident understanding. Then, to everyone's amazement, he led his family forward, not rushing, but with deliberate, measured steps. They stopped at the cairn, each shifter sniffing the pine cone in turn. The cubs looked to their father with questioning expressions. Scout made a soft sound, that familiar huffing noise that had always sounded like laughter. Then he did something he hadn't done since leaving them years before. He crossed the invisible boundary, stepped fully into the yard, and approached the humans who had once been his family. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that Tobias could see the flecks of gold in his eyes, the subtle patterns in his fur that shifted with his breathing. For a long moment, they simply regarded each other, human and shifter, 2 beings whose lives had intersected in a way neither could have imagined. Then Scout did something that brought tears to Tobias's eyes. He lowered his massive head and gently pressed it against Tobias's hand, the same trusting gesture he had made as a cub, seeking comfort and connection. "Hello, old friend," Tobias whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The rest of the family remained still, understanding the significance of this moment. Scout's mate watched cautiously from the cairn, keeping the cubs close, but there was no fear in her posture, only watchfulness, protection. After a moment, Scout stepped back and made a soft, vocalizing sound. From the forest's edge came an answering call, deeper, more resonant. The mother shifter appeared, her silver and black fur now streaked with gray, moving more slowly than she once had, but still powerful and regal. Scout's mother, the matriarch of the pack, had come to witness this reunion. The grandmother, Mara murmured in awe. Scout turned back to his human family and made another huffing sound, then a series of vocalizations that seemed almost like speech. Though they couldn't understand the literal meaning, the message was clear. "These are my cubs. This is my legacy, and you are part of our story." With gentle nudges, Scout guided his cubs forward, encouraging them to sniff the humans from a safe distance. The youngest, bolder than its siblings, actually took a tentative step toward Ellie, who knelt down with an outstretched hand. "It's okay," she said softly. "We're friends." The cub sniffed her fingers, then made a small sound of acceptance before retreating to its mother. As twilight deepened into dusk, Scout made one final circuit of the yard, revisiting places he had played as a cub, places that held memories. Then he returned to his family, nuzzling each of his cubs in turn before leading them back toward the forest. At the edge of the trees, he paused for one last look at the Reed family, at the humans who had saved him, raised him, and ultimately let him go when he needed to return to his wild heritage. He raised his head and let out a sound that was neither wolf nor bear, a unique vocalization that echoed through the clearing, at once a goodbye and a promise. Then he was gone, melting into the shadows with his family, leaving only the disturbed grass to show they had been there at all. "He'll be back," Oliver said with certainty. "Yes," Tobias agreed, his arm around Mara's shoulders as they watched the forest grow dark. Some bonds never break. That night, as the family sat on their porch under a blanket of stars, they listened to the sounds of Blackwood Forest. Somewhere in its depths, Scout's voice rose in harmony with his pack. Not quite a howl, not quite a roar. A unique song created by creatures who walked between worlds. And in that moment, the Reed family understood what a rare gift they had been given. They had not just adopted a strange bear cub. They had been adopted by a creature of legend, a shifter who had chosen to share his heart across the boundary between wild and tame, animal and human. Some might never believe their story. Some would call it impossible. But the Reed family knew the truth that lay at the heart of the Blackwood Forest, that the world was fuller of wonders than most people ever imagined, and that love could bridge even the most ancient divides. In the years that followed, the cairn of stones remained, a gateway between two worlds, maintained by two families who had found each other in the most unexpected of ways. And though they lived in different realms, one of cabins and schools and human concerns, the other of dens and hunting and wild freedoms, they remained connected by the memory of a time when a family adopted a strange bear cub, unaware it was not a bear at all, but something infinitely more precious. A friend.